There were nights when I'd jolt awake with my hands clenched so tightly, my fingernails would leave little crescent moons in my palms. Not from fear. Mind you, no. It wasn't nightmares. It was the kind of dream where I finally stood tall and told that man everything he deserved to hear. My name is Ruthie Mae Holloway. I'm 78 years old now. I'm sitting here on the front porch of my creaky old house in Russell, Kansas. The wooden boards beneath my feet groan like they've heard every story I've ever told. The prairie stretches out before me, and the golden wheat ripples like a sea in the early evening breeze. It's a view that has kept me grounded through heartbreak, joy, and the many storms of my life. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Let this old woman know. Drop a comment down below and tell me what corner of the world you're sitting in. It makes me feel like we're neighbors, chatting across a backyard fence. And if this story of mine stirs something in you, even just a flicker, go on and tap that like button. My granddaughter tells me it helps other folks find stories like mine. And trust me, there's more than just mine to tell. Now, where was I? Yes. I was 27 years old when I got promoted at Heartland Textiles. That was back in 1974. I'd spent nearly a decade there, having started out at just 19. Stitching seams in the far corner of that massive factory on the edge of Wichita. Back then, a Kansas girl like me had 3 paths laid out: farm wife, school teacher, or secretary. Maybe if she was lucky. But me, I was never one to follow a path someone else paved. When Jimmy, my fiancé, died in Vietnam in 1967, something inside me broke and remade itself. I was never quite the same after that. The grief didn't hollow me out, it steeled me. That was the moment I knew I couldn't just wait around in a small town, hoping another man might come along and marry me. I had to become someone on my own terms. I still remember the look on my daddy's face the day I told him I was leaving for Wichita. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just went quiet. Like I'd said something unholy. For almost a month, he didn't say a single word to me. No decent girl leaves her family to go chase a factory paycheck. He finally muttered one night at supper, his voice colder than Kansas frost. Mama didn't speak much either, but her silence was different. It was heavy with sadness, not judgment. The morning I left, I found a ham sandwich wrapped in wax paper and $7 tucked into my coat pocket. Mama had slipped them in when no one was watching. It was all she could give, without Daddy finding out. To me, Wichita might as well have been New York City. The buildings seemed taller, the people busier, the air thicker with smoke and machine oil. I rented a tiny room at Mrs. Finch's boarding house, squeezed in with 2 other factory girls. The rules were strict: no visitors, doors locked by 8:30, church on Sundays without fail. We scrubbed the same grime off our hands every night, only for it to return by morning. I wasn't used to that kind of labor. My hands, once soft from household chores, grew rough with calluses and needle scars. I still carry some of those tiny reminders on my fingertips. And yet, there was something oddly satisfying about the work. While other girls dreamed of escape, I found myself strangely drawn to it, all curious, determined, hungry for something more. Most of the girls at the factory saw it as a temporary stop, just a job, until they found a husband or moved on to something easier. But not me. I treated every shift like it mattered. Like what I did at that sewing machine could build something more than just a paycheck. I'd stay after hours. Not to gossip in the break room like some, but to watch the supervisors inspect the seams and hems. I asked about fabric blends, shipment deadlines, how orders were tracked, and who made decisions. I wanted to understand the machine behind the machines. And eventually, someone noticed. Mr. Jenkins, the oldest supervisor on the floor, gruff. No nonsense. And not known for handing out compliments, called me over one afternoon. Holloway, he said, using my last name like he did with the men. You've got better eyes than half these boys running quality control. Ever thought about moving up? Coming from him. That was high praise. And when Harold Meyer, the assistant supervisor, retired in '72, it was Jenkins who nudged me to apply. But the factory wasn't ready for a woman in charge. The day word got out that I'd thrown my name into the ring, the laughter echoed through the hallways. Susan Parker, who'd stitched beside me for nearly 5 years, cornered me at lunch with eyes full of worry. Ruthie, you really think they'll take you seriously? These men barely listen to us as it is. I smiled, but my stomach churned. I knew she wasn't wrong. Still, I couldn't back down now. I'd come too far to shrink back into silence. I didn't get the job that year. They gave it to a man named Donovan, who wasn't unkind, but made it clear from day one he'd been skeptical of me. Even so, I worked beside him as assistant. I learned, I listened, and slowly, he began to see me differently. By the time he transferred out in '74, he personally recommended me for his replacement, but the promotion didn't come wrapped in congratulations. Mr. Hargrove, the factory director, they made it crystal clear. They're only doing this to look good on paper. Holloway. One mistake, and this whole equal opportunity nonsense ends with you. I walked out of Mr. Hargrove's office with my heart pounding so loud, I thought it might echo down the hallway. Pride and fear fought for space inside me. I was now the first woman supervisor in the 30-year history of H. Heartland Textiles. My salary was nearly double what it had been. And for the first time, I could afford to send money back to Mama and Daddy. After years of drought that had nearly ruined their farm, I finally had something to offer in return for all they'd sacrificed. That evening, I sat on the edge of my narrow boarding house bed and wrote a letter home. I told Mama I'd been promoted. I told her I was proud. I didn't mention the warning Mr. Hargrove gave me, or the weight already settling on my shoulders. She didn't need to know that part. I just wanted her to feel that her quiet gift, the sandwich, the $7 had not been wasted. The next morning, everything felt different. I arrived early, before the machines started humming. Before the women clocked in, I wanted time to go over the production reports and schedules. I sat at the little desk in the glass-walled office, now marked with my name. It didn't feel real yet. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, confident. Vernon Rollins. He stepped into my office without knocking and leaned against the doorframe like he owned the air I was breathing. So you're the one they picked for this experiment, he said, glancing at me like I was a stray dog trying to run with the cattle. I extended my hand. He didn't shake it. Let's see how long you last. Miss Holloway, he added, his smirk sharp as a blade. I met his gaze without flinching. I imagine that'll depend on how well I do the job. Mr. Rollins. His smile didn't touch his eyes. We'll see about that. And in that moment, I knew I hadn't just earned a title, I'd stepped onto a battlefield. The day after my promotion, I arrived at the factory 30 minutes early. The air was cold and smelled of oil, fabric, and early winter. My stomach was twisted in knots. But I held my head high. I wanted to be prepared, to review production targets before the floor filled with the sound of stitching and chatter. I needed to prove, first to myself, that I was ready. But Vernon Rollins was already waiting. He leaned casually in my office doorway like he had nothing better to do. "Surprised you came back?" he said, voice slick with sarcasm. Most women would have come to their senses by now. I didn't even look up. "I'm not most women, Mr. Rollins. And these production targets are manageable. But we need to address the threading issue on line 3. He stepped closer, towering over my desk. "Your job is to keep those girls sewing. Equipment isn't your concern. Leave the technical matters to the men." It was the first of many small, sharp cuts. Over the following weeks, Vernon made it clear he intended to make my life hell. Production schedules were altered without my knowledge. Important memos conveniently skipped my inbox. At staff meetings, my chair was mysteriously missing, forcing me to scramble for one, while everyone watched in silence. "Oh dear," Rollins would say with a smirk. "Must have been the janitor. Didn't think anyone would be sitting there." The men chuckled, eyes averted. They weren't cruel, just scared. Scared of siding with the woman management barely tolerated? Then came the Monday morning ambush. My team showed up late, not by their doing, but because Rollins had told them their shift started an hour later. No one had informed me. Hargrove called me in. "Face un readable. We lost $500 in productivity. Miss Holloway, you'll need to sign this written warning." I stood there, stunned. "Sir, I wasn't told about the schedule change. Mr. Rollins says he discussed it with you on Friday." I hadn't. But calling him a liar would be suicide. My hand trembled slightly as I signed the warning. That night, I sobbed quietly into my pillow. But I also made myself a promise I would not cry over Vernon Rollins again. After that Monday, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Vernon Rollins had made it his personal mission to crush me, not just professionally, but emotionally, spiritually. He didn't yell or throw things. No, he was smarter than that. His attacks came in the form of subtle sabotage and public humiliation, each one designed to wear me down piece by piece. My paperwork started disappearing from my desk. Maintenance orders for my department's faulty machines mysteriously went unprocessed. And when quality control rolled around, Rollins would hover like a vulture, nitpicking the tiniest imperfections no one else would have noticed. "This hem looks like it was done by a blind raccoon," he'd say loud enough for other teams to hear. Then, turning to me with false concern, "Is this the kind of standard you're aiming for? Miss Holloway, perhaps homemaking would suit you better." The worst part wasn't even him, it was the silence of the others. The other supervisors who wouldn't meet my eyes. The men who'd once joked with me during lunch now shifted awkwardly when I entered the room. They didn't join in, but they didn't stop it either. And silence, I learned, can be just as sharp as cruelty. Still, not everyone turned their backs. Martha, a collar stitcher with 2 decades of experience. They would sometimes leave an apple or a homemade cookie on my desk when things got especially tough. Doreen, the youngest in my team, with hands faster than any machine, stayed late without being asked whenever we were behind schedule. One evening, while the others had gone home and Doreen and I were still stitching in silence, she looked up and said softly, "Don't let him push you out. Miss Ruthie, my grandma used to say the devil works hardest against the ones who scare him most." Her words hit me deep. By the end of 6 months, I was worn down to the bone. My weight had dropped. I had constant headaches. Certain noises made me jump. But somehow, I was still standing. What Rollins hadn't counted on was this. I was a farm girl from Kansas. And farm girls don't break easy. By midsummer of '74, the pressure had built into something close to warfare. Vernon Rollins wasn't slowing down, if anything. He was escalating, and while I was managing to keep my team on track, I could feel myself being stretched thinner with every passing day. Then came the 4th of July order, a big shipment for a department store chain in Dallas. With a firm deadline and no room for error, my team had been working overtime for days. I personally checked every box, every seam, every collar, making sure the shipment was flawless. We were ready. That's when Rollins made his move. He marched onto the factory floor with Mr. Hargrove and 2 men in sleek suits, executives from Dallas. "And here we have the sewing department," he said loudly, "where we've recently had some quality control issues." My stomach dropped. I stepped forward, trying to maintain calm. "Mr. Rollins." The shipment was double-checked. "Every item meets the order specifications." He gave me a look of theatrical pity. "That's exactly the problem. Miss Holloway. Gentlemen, if you'll examine these samples." He pulled out 3 shirts from a clipboard box, badly made, with puckered seams and misaligned buttons, but they weren't ours. I knew that instantly. "These didn't come from my team," I said, lifting one and inspecting it. "They're marked with purple thread on the inside seam. My department switched to blue markers 3 weeks ago, under Mr. Rollins' directive." For a moment, silence blanketed the factory floor. Dozens of eyes turned to us. Even Mr. Hargrove looked uncomfortable. Rollins' face twitched. "I may have used samples from the reject bin for demonstration purposes." One of the Dallas men nodded thoughtfully. "Well, Miss Holloway, this is the first time our order's been early with 0 defects. Whatever you're doing here, keep doing it." I thanked him. But inside, my chest burned with a mixture of vindication and dread. I'd exposed Rollins publicly. That wouldn't stop him. If anything, I knew it had just made things worse. Rollins didn't yell. He didn't confront me. That would have been too obvious. No. What came next was quieter, more calculated and more cruel. The morning after the Dallas executives left, I found a dead mouse in my desk drawer, its tiny body curled under my notepad, the smell faint but unmistakable. I didn't scream. I didn't flinch. I simply got a tissue, removed it, and cleaned the drawer. But the message was clear: I had embarrassed him, and he would not forget it. The following week, the restroom nearest to my department was suddenly under maintenance. For nearly 2 weeks, my team had to walk halfway across the factory for every break. Then the air conditioning in our section broke conveniently during the hottest days of summer. No one came to fix it, so I adapted. I bought small desk fans with my own money and brought one for each woman in my team. I reorganized break schedules to save time. I double-checked every order and started locking key paperwork in my car trunk at the end of the day. Every attack Vernon Rollins threw at me only hardened my resolve. I wasn't trying to prove anything to him anymore. I was trying to protect my team and myself from a man who would have burned the whole factory down just to see a woman fail. But even the strongest steel can weaken if battered long enough. By autumn, the toll was becoming undeniable. I'd lost weight. My sleep was shallow. My thoughts always racing. Loud noises startled me. On my monthly visit to the farm, Mama placed a damp cloth on my forehead during a pounding headache. "No job is worth your health, Ruthie Mae," she whispered. "I can't quit." I said. Daddy, who'd softened over the years, surprised me with a few quiet words. "Ain't about quitting. It's about learning how to fight smart." Those words echoed through my mind on the long drive back to Wichita. Fighting smart. I didn't know what that meant yet. But I knew one thing. I couldn't beat Rollins by working harder. I'd have to outthink him. The idea came to me in the stillness of night, when even exhaustion couldn't drown out the echo of my father's words. Fight smart. I stared at the ceiling of my tiny apartment. The cracked paint above me, glowing faintly in the moonlight. And I realized if I couldn't beat Rollins with strength, I'd beat him with something stronger, truth. I needed evidence. The next morning, I skipped my usual lunch and walked 3 blocks to a corner store. I bought a plain, spiral-bound notebook, nothing fancy. Just lined pages and a stiff cardboard cover. It fit neatly in my purse. But that little notebook would become the sharpest tool I ever carried. That night, I opened to the first page and wrote the date in careful print, the 1st of October. 1974. Then I wrote, Day 1 of documentation. Every night after that, no matter how tired I was, I recorded everything. I noted conversations, exact phrases, timestamps, and names of anyone who might have overheard. I kept copies of memos that contradicted each other and slipped them between the pages like pressed flowers. Each entry became a thread in a net I was slowly, quietly weaving. The 3rd of October, Rollins told shipping our rush order for Macy's would be delayed. When I confronted him, he claimed I had asked for the extension. Witnesses Jim from shipping, Carol from billing. The 7th of October production targets raised by 15% without added staff. Other departments unaffected. Hargrove says Rollins said, I volunteered. Never happened. The 12th of October, 3rd maintenance request for Line 7 ignored. Machine still broken. Worker Dorothy Miller lost half a day's wages. I was meticulous. Paranoid. Maybe. But with every note, I felt stronger. I still couldn't change the power dynamics of the factory. But I could change the story being told about me by making sure there was a second version, written in my own hand. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew this someday. Someone would need to hear my truth. And when that day came, I'd be ready. A notebook alone wasn't going to be enough. I knew that. It was a start but not a shield. What I needed were allies, witnesses, people who had also seen what was happening and were brave enough or fed up enough to speak. Finding them wasn't easy. Most of the men in management had already chosen their side. Whether they agreed with Rollins or just didn't want to cross him, the result was the same silence. As for the women on the floor, they were good, hardworking, and loyal, but they had mouths to feed, rent to pay. Risking their jobs for me wasn't something I could ask of them lightly. So I started small, quietly. Gladys in accounting was the first. A stern woman in her 50s with gray curls and a stare sharp as a needle. She'd worked at the factory since before I was born. One day in the ladies' room, one of the few places men wouldn't dare linger, she leaned over and whispered, He's altering your department's timesheets. Making it look like your girls are taking longer breaks. Can you prove it? I asked. Heart pounding. She hesitated, then nodded. I keep my own records. Off the books, but accurate. Could I see them? Just to compare. Another long pause. Then she whispered, Meet me at Woolworth's lunch counter tomorrow. Noon. Don't be late. She showed up with a manila envelope tucked into her handbag. The records matched mine except hers, showed the real numbers. My team wasn't slacking off. Someone was lying. After that, the network started to grow. Slowly, carefully. Richard from maintenance admitted Rollins had told him to deprioritize any requests from my section. Helen in personnel quietly confirmed that applications to fill my team's vacancies had gone missing before I ever saw them. Each new truth went into my notebook. I kept them hidden in my apartment, tucked inside an old flour tin, far from any prying eyes. By Christmas, I'd filled the first notebook completely. I bought a second. It still wasn't a plan. Not yet. But it was a strategy. And more importantly, it was hope. The factory felt different during the holidays. Rollins took 2 weeks off to visit family in Michigan. And in his absence, the atmosphere shifted. For the first time in months, things ran smoothly. Machines that had been waiting on parts suddenly got fixed. Orders were completed ahead of schedule. My department exceeded our quotas 3 days in a row. Even Mr. Hargrove passed me in the hallway one morning and offered a curt nod, his version of a standing ovation. But peace never lasts long when you're fighting a war. In early January of 1975, Rollins returned, and he came back swinging. He dropped a folder on my desk with the weight of a hammer. "Your performance review," he said with a smirk. I took the liberty of preparing it myself. Given our reporting structure, I opened it and felt the blood drain from my face. On a scale of 1 to 5, he'd rated me a 1 in every category: leadership, decision-making, communication, problem-solving, except punctuality, which got a reluctant 3. It was a death sentence in black ink. With a review like this in my file, I could be demoted or fired. Worse, no future employer would ever give me a chance. I looked up. This doesn't reflect the actual performance of my department. We've met or exceeded targets for 3 straight quarters. Numbers are just one part of the picture. He replied coolly. This reflects my professional judgment. He'd already gotten Hargrove's signature. That stung more than I could say. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with both notebooks, stacks of documents, and a growing fire in my chest. I'd been playing defense too long, reacting, surviving. But Daddy's words returned to me. Fight smart. That night, I stopped being a victim of Vernon Rollins's game. I became the strategist. For 2 full days, I prepared. No crying, no anger, just methodical work. I combed through every memo, every timesheet, every performance report and maintenance log I'd collected over the past 6 months. I highlighted discrepancies, printed out charts, and drafted a formal report that outlined the pattern: sabotage, negligence, retaliation. Then I practiced. In the mirror, in my kitchen, even in the bathroom at work, I rehearsed every word until I could say it without shaking. This wasn't just about saving my job anymore. It was about telling the truth. Not just mine, but the truth of every woman who'd ever been pushed out quietly, without fanfare or fairness. On Thursday at exactly 2:00 p.m., I knocked on Mr. Hargrove's office door. He looked up from his desk, surprised. "Come in, Miss Holloway." I wasn't expecting to see Vernon Rollins already seated across from him, legs crossed, smirking like he'd already won. My pulse spiked, but I didn't show it. I invited Mr. Rollins. "Since your concerns seem to involve his department," Hargrove said. I nodded calmly and sat. "Actually, sire, they involve his behavior toward me and my team." Rollins chuckled, full of smug confidence. "Robert, I told you this would happen. Some women aren't cut out for pressure, so they look for someone to blame." I didn't blink. I opened my folder and began placing documents on Hargrove's desk. One by one. Here are scheduling changes made without notification. Another stack. These are maintenance requests ignored repeatedly. Another. This is comparative staffing data across departments. Mine is consistently understaffed despite increased quotas. Rollins shifted. Then I placed the performance review on top. And this, I said evenly, contains evaluations that contradict every measurable outcome in my department. Verified by accounting and quality control. The room fell silent except for the slow ticking of the clock. Hargrove looked down at the stack in front of him. Rollins, for the first time, didn't speak. I had arrived with nothing but truth. And suddenly, the silence felt like power. Rollins broke the silence with a fist to the desk. This is ridiculous. She's fabricating this entire mess. Vindictive. Emotional. Exactly why women don't belong in management. Hargrove didn't look at him. Instead, he turned to me. Voice level. Miss Holloway. Are you suggesting, Mr. Rollins deliberately misled this company. I didn't blink. I'm not suggesting anything. Sire, I'm showing you evidence. The pattern is clear. Rollins shifted again. His face now flushed with something I hadn't seen before, panic. I'll need to review this thoroughly, Hargrove said slowly, tapping the stack of documents. I'll be in touch. I stood, smoothing my skirt. Of course. Sire. For the record, I've kept copies and original notes. As I left, I caught one last look at Rollins. His expression had changed. That glint of arrogance had finally cracked. What replaced it wasn't just anger. It was fear. He had underestimated me, thought I would cry, break, or disappear. But I hadn't. I'd learned to fight with facts, with process, with professionalism, and something shifted that day, not just in that room, but in me. I walked back to the factory floor, feeling taller somehow. The machines hummed. The air smelled like oil and cotton dust as always. But the world had tilted slightly in my favor for the first time. I didn't know what would happen next. But I knew I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for every woman in that building, watching me from the corner of her eye, silently wondering if someone like her could ever win. I had no answer yet, but I had hope. The next 3 days were the quietest I'd known since my promotion. Rollins vanished from the floor. Whispers floated everywhere he was sick. He'd been suspended. He was in Chicago facing the executives. My department kept their heads down, but I caught the glances women watching me closely, waiting to see what would come next. On the 4th morning, Mr. Hargrove's secretary appeared at my door. He'd like to see you, she said simply. I walked the same hallway I'd walked dozens of times. But this time, my steps felt heavier, not with fear, but with purpose. Inside, Hargrove sat alone. A single folder sat on his desk. My folder. Sit down. Miss Holloway, he said. I did, folding my hands calmly in my lap. I've reviewed your report, he began, tapping the papers. I've also spoken to several employees, Gladys, Richard, Helen, and the representatives from Dallas. They confirmed your account. I waited. Effective immediately. Mr. Rollins has been transferred to Detroit. They need a floor manager. I exhaled quietly. Let me be clear. Hargrove continued. This is a personnel realignment, not an admission of wrongdoing. Of course not. Heaven forbid the company admit it tolerated abuse. But I nodded. Understood. See ya. He cleared his throat. Your performance review has also been revised. I've assessed your numbers myself. They're impressive. Thank you. One more thing, he added, eyes narrowing slightly. Corporate has approved a new position, assistant production manager, factory-wide oversight. Reporting directly to me. I'd like you to take it. He blinked. You're offering me a promotion, his thin smile returned. Consider it recognition of your persistence. It felt surreal. 2 promotions in 1 year, from a sewing machine to management. I thought of Mama, of Daddy's voice saying, "Fight smart." I'd be honored. Sire, start Monday. You'll want to begin training your replacement. Doreen's ready, I said without hesitation. She already runs the floor when I'm not there. Another woman in management, he murmured. Yes. Sire. And not the last. The transition wasn't smooth, not even close. My first management meeting in the new role. Someone had placed a baby doll in my chair. Blonde curls. Pink dress. A mocking symbol of what they thought I was out of place. Too soft. Not serious. I didn't flinch. I picked it up, tucked it into my desk drawer, and took my seat like nothing happened. The sabotage didn't end with Rollins. It simply changed shape. Now it came as exclusions. Meetings held without me. Crucial memos forgotten. Snide comments wrapped in fake compliments. I didn't argue. I wrote it all down. My notebook remained my weapon. My witness. But I wasn't fighting alone anymore. Doreen thrived as department supervisor. Her youth didn't hold her back. It energized her. She introduced improvements to the workflow. Listened to the older women. Respected their methods. When the men dismissed her ideas, I was there to back her up. And every time they tried to speak over her, I redirected the room. Let Dorne finish. Please. I'd say, every time, and something began to shift. Other women in the factory, seamstresses, pressers, line workers, started applying for positions they'd never considered before. They started asking questions, making suggestions, and more importantly, they began documenting, like me. In March of 1976, Emma Rodriguez from the cutting floor became our 3rd female supervisor. By year's end, 5 of the factory's 12 supervisor roles were held by women. Not because of quotas or PR stunts, but because they earned them. Because they were good at their jobs. They had simply been waiting for someone to light the first fire. And I had lit it. My proudest moment didn't come with applause or a trophy. It came in the spring of 1977. In a crowded factory canteen that smelled faintly of coffee and machine oil, with folding chairs pulled into crooked rows and workers in their uniforms pausing to listen. It was Mr. Hargrove's retirement gathering. He stood in front of everyone. No desk between him and the people he'd led for over 4 decades. Without that barrier, he looked smaller, older, more human. He cleared his throat. I've spent more than 40 years in this place. He began. I've seen it survive war shortages, economic slumps, and surges of growth. But I'll tell you this, nothing's challenged me more than the changes we've seen these past couple of years. He looked over at me, and then at Doreen, Emma, Gladys, women who now sat at the management table. There were things I didn't believe in, things I thought wouldn't work. But the numbers don't lie. Productivity is up 17%. Error rates have dropped. Turnover is the lowest it's ever been. He paused, swallowing hard. Turns out, when you give people a fair shot, regardless of what they've got between their legs, they tend to show you what they're really made of. 2 weeks later, his replacement arrived from corporate in Chicago. Catherine Michaels. She didn't smile much. But when she shook your hand, you felt it in your spine. She wore sensible shoes, didn't wear perfume, and didn't pretend to be anyone she wasn't. On her second day, she called me in. "They told me you keep meticulous notes," she said. Matter of fact. "I do," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "So do I?" She pulled out a cracked, leather-bound journal. Documentation is power. That and knowing when to use it, with Catherine in the lead, and me as her right hand, we began reworking the very bones of Heartland Textiles. We redrew department lines. We introduced performance-based advancement. We implemented pay parity across gender and position. We even fought hard for a small on-site daycare, and we won. By 1982, when Catherine was promoted to corporate, 40% of our leadership team were women. That year, I was named factory director. 12 spiral-bound notebooks came with me. I kept them under my desk, not to remember the pain but the fight. When younger women came to me, unsure of their worth, I showed them those pages. Write it down. I told them, all of it. Build your case. You are not alone. I retired from Heartland Textiles in the spring of 1995. After 28 years of service, 28 years of fights and wins, late-night shifts and early morning paperwork, of carrying burdens in silence and of speaking up when no one else dared. The retirement party was held in the canteen, the same place where Hargrove had once made his farewell speech. This time, the room was strung with paper banners. Someone had stitched one by hand, "Thank you, Ruthie," and hung it behind the buffet table. The food was simple fried chicken, potato salad, deviled eggs, lemon bars, the kind of food working people made when they meant, "We care." There were more people than I expected. Former supervisors, floor workers, even a few folks from corporate. And at the far end of the room stood Catherine Michaels. I hadn't seen her in years. She'd flown in from Chicago. "I wouldn't have missed it," she said when I approached, her voice as dry and direct as ever. "You taught me more than you realize." I gave her a smile. "You taught me to hold the line." When the speeches began, I felt awkward, like I'd been called to center stage in a play I didn't audition for. Doreen spoke first. Now, a seasoned manager herself. She held up a small spiral notebook. "This isn't one of Ruthie's," she said, "but it's mine. And I started keeping it because of her. Because she taught me that silence protects no one. And that truth on paper carries weight." There were a few tears then, not just from me. After the applause, Catherine stepped forward. She handed me a gift wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with navy ribbon. I opened it slowly. Inside was a leather-bound journal, deep brown, sturdy, blank. "For your next chapter," she said simply. I ran my fingers over the cover. "Let's hope it's less eventful." "Maybe," she said, but I wouldn't bet on it. That night, back at my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table where I had once cried into factory schedules and late reports. I opened the journal, stared at the empty page, and for once, I didn't feel the urgency to fill it. In the months that followed, I adjusted to retirement with surprising ease. I planted marigolds in the garden. I took long walks around the edge of town. I consulted, occasionally, for small businesses trying to build more equitable workplaces. But mostly I rested, truly rested. I bought a little home in Russell, Kansas, not far from my sister's place. Quiet street, wide porch, fields stretching like a golden ocean beyond the backyard. The same prairie that once felt like confinement now felt like peace. The sky here changes colors like watercolor, from soft pinks to blazing orange. then into the deep velvet blue of dusk. I sit out here most evenings, letting the wind wrap itself around me like an old song. I think a lot about those notebooks, about what they meant not just to me, but to every woman who saw them. They were more than evidence. They were proof that our stories mattered. Even when the world told us to keep quiet, I still have them. All 12. Lined up neatly in a wooden box in my bedroom closet. I take them out sometimes, not to relive the pain, but to remember the victory. And sometimes, just sometimes, a young woman still reaches out, someone who's heard the story, or read a report about the factory that changed things. They ask for advice, for encouragement, for strategy. I tell them, write everything down. Build your case. Know your worth. And most of all, find your allies. Because no revolution, no matter how quiet, is ever won alone. Now, from this porch in Russell, Kansas, I watch the wheat sway in the sun. These fields once felt like a cage. Now, they feel like home. If there's one lesson I hope you carry from my story, it's this: you don't have to shout to start a revolution. Sometimes, it begins with a notebook, a single decision to pay attention, to write things down, to refuse silence. That quiet act, documenting what others dismiss, is how change begins. I didn't set out to change Heartland Textiles. I only wanted to do my job, to be respected, to earn my place. But what I learned was that when one woman refuses to break, she creates space for others to stand. Every small act matters. A copied memo, a late-night entree, a kind word slipped into a coat pocket. These things add up. They build strength. They build stories. They build legacy. To all the women who've ever been talked over in meetings, passed over for promotion, blamed for someone else's mistake, this story is for you. To the men who chose to listen rather than dismiss, who stood beside rather than in front, thank you. We need more of you. Now I want to ask you, the person watching this, have you ever felt unseen at work, like your voice didn't matter, like you were just one step away from being erased? If so, I want you to know you're not alone. And you don't have to face it without tools. Start with your own notebook, digital or paper. Record what happens. Build your story. And when the time comes, tell it. Because your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. And if this story meant something to you, if it stirred something in your chest, reminded you of someone, or maybe even of yourself, I'd be mighty grateful if you'd give this video a like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but for every woman whose story hasn't been told yet, and for those who are still fighting quietly, every day, with notebooks in hand, waiting for the world to listen. The prairie sun is setting now, but the next chapter, that's yours to write.